Really, Andrew's a driving force at the WorldGBC, and he's making a tremendous difference. I think a lot of it is driven by his love for his family and his concern for future generations. So let's welcome Andrew, and while we're doing that, let's thank him.
All right, thank you very much. I'm very excited and proud about today's opportunity with the summit. It's interesting how in Washington recently I was down for the United Nations Environmental Program efforts, getting ready for Copenhagen, and I'll talk about that in a few minutes. But when it came to my mind that I really wanted to showcase to Canadian leaders, people in the industry that I'm familiar with, some of the key projects and initiatives that we're doing around the world, I really reached out to my good friend, Karen Grover. He has a presentation that will completely wow you. Very emotional, very passionate man. I'm very proud to have him here. Thank you, Karen, for coming. And Frank Biden, we just met actually today, but our phone conversations have been great, and our lunch meetings have been fantastic. So I think it's going to be really good energy moving forward. So to start my presentation off, though, I really want to talk a bit very quickly about the World Green Building Council. When we first started in Toronto, when the Toronto and Region Conservation Authority took the leadership to bring the World Green Building Council to Toronto, we started off with the notion and the strategy of really strong, rapid council creation, developing the intellectual resources, the leadership support required for large-scale international opportunities. When we began in 2007, the early part of 2007, there were 11 councils around the world. We've now worked hard to increase that number to 40 countries at various stages of development around the world, very rapid growth. One of our primary objectives is to provide the resources for these councils as well. We can't expect them just to go off on their own. So we've published a few reports, specifically this one here, the Global Green Building Trends. 700 building construction firms around the world we interviewed and asked about the growth and expectations of green around the world. So that kind of information really helps us understand how we can influence the marketplace, realizing that the industry is a $4.7 trillion industry, 100 million people employed worldwide, and affects 10% of the global gross domestic product. And I think the most important initiative, and the reason why we're here today, is to talk about some of the efforts towards Copenhagen. Now, I want to poll the audience here very quickly and ask, how many people feel they have a confident understanding of what's going to happen in Copenhagen and what's been leading up to it? Can I just see some hands, if there's a confidence level? None? One or two, three or four? Okay, so that's a problem, and it's something we really have to work through. And now I want to ask a question of some of the people, for example, of within the idea of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. For example, this is the effort that created the Kyoto Protocol. How many people have been following the process and are confident with the process and understanding the political developments? Anybody have any confidence with that? So that's part of my concern. So I want to take 5 minutes to just go over some of the steps that have happened over the past number of years. So the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change really began in 1992. This was through the Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro. And really the whole target is to look at reducing carbon emissions well below 1990 levels. That's the primary focus. The UNFCCC is divided into two primary categories, two annexes. Annex 1 is about developed countries or industrializing countries, and then Annex 2 is developing nations. Right now, as of 2009, there's 192 nations and 4 observer nations in this process. Supporting all of that, we have the Secretariat, we have UN bodies and agencies. So for example, the United Nations Environmental Program that I belong to. You have the intergovernmental organizations, very important, and you have non-governmental organizations. So for example, World Wildlife Fund, World Green Building Council, World Business Council for Sustainable Development. So there's a lot of leadership wrapped up in all of this. And working through all that together, there is annual conferences of the parties, is what they're called. This is when everybody comes together to review what's possible with carbon reductions. In 1995 was the first conference of the parties, and there's been about 14 since that point up until now. At each conference of the parties annually, negotiators are individuals or groups that represent each country. What their job is to come forward and present the perspectives, the knowledge, the information, and the commitments that countries are going to give towards CO2 reduction. So you can already see where this can start getting a little sticky politically. If some countries aren't quite stepping up, if some are causing issues, and everybody gets a chance to present what their positions are from each country. To make sure that the right information is in front of these leaders, there is a body which you might be more familiar with, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. This is where Dr. Pachauri of India, the chairman of the IPCC, and Al Gore had received the Nobel Peace Prize. And really what the IPCC does is provide a series of assessment reports on climate change and what's happening around the world. Now, the interesting thing about the IPCC is specifically the fourth assessment report that was put out in 2007. This was the largest research ever pulled together on climate change, involving thousands of scientists around the world and leaders, talking about what are the ramifications of climate change and what stage are we at. Now, some interesting controversial statements came up from this. First of all, they made statements that a 2-degree temperature increase was almost unavoidable, that a 3-degree temperature increase was most likely. Now, the part that gets very nervous and scary for me is the fact that it's unlikely, as a species, that we are going to be able to adapt to a 3-degree temperature increase. Okay, that's something that we really need to consider. In order to stabilize temperatures at 2 to 3 degrees, emissions must remain below 450 parts per million. We're now sitting at 430 parts per million. Okay? So the Kyoto Protocol was developed based on the information provided by the IPCC. Now, we've already heard some of the concerns about the Kyoto Protocol. In particular for me, though, is that it was really put into force in 1997. And it wasn't really ratified until Russia came on board in 2005. That's a long time for something of the structure of the Kyoto Protocol. And you see the list on the wall here of the number of different issues that have with it. The one that's most prevalent to me, or the most important to me, is the fact that when Kyoto was put into place, there wasn't really an agenda around the built environment. It was really talking about deforestation and poverty and issues of more of a natural systems process. So, Copenhagen, this is the next big step for us. Okay? This is what's being called the new global deal. Now, I think that when this comes up in December, there's a few things that are going to be a bit different from Kyoto. Opportunities are there, but it's also being called our last chance. In other words, based on the way natural systems on this planet are working, based on the way the oceans are warming, the desalination of the oceans, the temperatures and others, working through those systems and how long it takes the planet to change and evolve, we've got to start doing something now so that future generations can survive. Okay? What I think is unique about this is the fact that the business community internationally is very much in support of this. If you go on the website and look at the Copenhagen conference, sponsors are very strong there, from BMW, from Volvo, and others, very, very strong sponsors from the corporate community. And I think that could be a bit of an opportunity.